I'm Joel Obermeyer. I'm Executive Director of Widen the Circle. Thank you for coming to Widen the Circle's event, focusing on innovative approaches to countering anti-Semitism and other prejudice. I'm really excited to hear from a great group of speakers, and really, it's a really good one. Before we get moving, though, I'd like to give a quick explanation of Widen the Circle and one other thing. So Widen the Circle's mission is to combat hate through a shared understanding of the past. One of the ways we do this is by building international bridges between Germany and the US, similar to this event. We present the Obermeyer Awards in Berlin, and also we are building a network of activists and educators in Germany who focus on history and fighting prejudice. After you hear from the panelists, there will be time for you to ask questions in the chat. But before we get started, or actually as we get started, I'm going to start us with a story that I ask you all to consider with me. And I've changed some details of the story to make this anonymous. So I have a close friend, a woman who lives in a nearby suburb, and she has a daughter who was in her early elementary school years before the pandemic. Back then, this girl was about 7 years old. And in her class, her teacher had this thing that she did. The teacher would leave papers out in the classroom, and at the top of the papers it said, "I wish my teacher knew." And then it gave a space for kids to write what they wish their teacher knew. So the teacher got in touch with my friend one day because of a message her daughter wrote. And here's the message the little girl wrote to her teacher. "I wish my teacher knew I don't want to be Jewish anymore because everyone wants to kill Jews." And she was 7 years old. As far as my friend knows, there was no precipitating incident. The girl wasn't bullied or made fun of for being Jewish. The family had talked about Black Lives Matter and a little bit about anti-Semitism at home. But it's really not clear where that girl's belief came from. And to me, that makes it even more troubling. And here's one lesson that I take from it. Fear among Jews in the US and elsewhere is real, and it's growing, and no one's immune. Not even a 7-year-old. There's something else we should note today, which is that today is the 3rd anniversary of the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh. This is when a man entered the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh and killed 11 people, the worst incident of its kind in the US. Okay, so now we know what the stakes are. Now we have 3 people at this event who can offer insights into different ways to approach the problem of anti-Semitism. And they are Ken Stern, who is the director of the Bard Center for the Study of Hate and former director of the Division on Anti-Semitism and Extremism at the American Jewish Committee. He's one of the US's leading experts on anti-Semitism. Nice to have you here, Ken.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
You bet. Second is Veronica Nam, who is the director of the Anne Frank Center in Berlin. Veronica is an expert in historical learning in primary schools, particularly the link between historical learning and human rights education. She also focuses on pedagogical work against anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination. Nice to have you here, Veronica.
Thank you for inviting me.
And then the third person is Wencke Stegemann. Wencke is a German educator who focuses on anti-Semitism, racism, and democracy education. She's the founder of Stories for Tomorrow, a German organization that runs seminars, workshops, and study trips that create a space for dialogue and shared learning on anti-Semitism and bigotry. Nice to have you here, Wencke.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
You bet. We will hear from all 3 panelists and then have time for questions and answers. The event is scheduled for about an hour, but those who wish to stick around for some informal discussion can certainly stay a bit longer. One more point before we start. Many people are focusing on how to draw the line between criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism, and that's an important and complicated topic. We may touch on it, but it's not going to be the primary focus of our speakers today. Okay, let's move forward. Ken, it's great to have you here. Could you maybe start with, actually, let's hold off till we all together. Here we go. So could you please just start with a quick summary about the Bard Center for the Study of Hate and what you're trying to accomplish?
Sure, thank you. Well, the Bard Center for the Study of Hate is one of the newer hate studies centers, and it's premised on the idea that we don't know enough about hatred and how to deal with it. We have, for example, medicine is a field that deals with the fact that human beings get sick, and we pull together from different disciplines, chemistry, physics, biology, to address particular problems. Same with architecture, we pull from math and physics and art because people need shelter. But with the idea of hatred, it's everything is sort of siloed in different parts of the academy. And the problem with that is that the people that are actually trying to do something about hatred, either hatred writ large or a particular subset of it, whether it's anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or anti-LGBTQ or racism or whatever, there really are it's a very limited amount of testable theories to guide people in terms of their action. So we're trying to build a culture and an academic center that brings research, energy from students, new teaching, to try to really coalesce the thinking about them. I could talk about, if you're interested, about the specific programs of how we do it, but that's
Sure.
the mission.
Yeah, so like kind of a broad effort that involves a range of disciplines. That makes sense. Okay, so I'm now going to drill down a little bit more into anti-Semitism. Can you briefly talk about the lens you use when you think about the issue of anti-Semitism, particularly the role of what I've heard you call us versus them thinking, or othering sometimes, and conspiracies?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of different subcomponents of that, but
Sure.
sometimes when people see an anti-Semitic event, their response is to sort of try to diminish it by saying, well, this is just subsumed in, it's a type of racism, whatever. It's a way to not focus on the fact that it really is targeted against Jews. And when I was at AJC, I remember various different foreign officials coming in and basically saying that, that line, which was to me a way of not addressing anti-Semitism, especially when people were getting attacked. But the flip side of that, to me, is the much more important thing. We can't understand anti-Semitism and what to do about it if we see it as somehow sui generis and outside the families of hatreds. Because as long as human beings have existed, we've had the capacity to define who's an us and who's of them. And sometimes that divide leads to, as we all know through history, disastrous results, ideologies, theologies, genocides, and so forth. So to me, it's always been important to see anti-Semitism as a subset of that and how it works. And that leads us to, you were asking about lenses, a variety of larger lenses than sometimes we think about anti-Semitism as, well, it's just a matter of what people are saying about Jews. But you remarked at your opening that this is the anniversary of the Tree of Life synagogue. So let's think about that for a moment. You have
Sure.
somebody going into a synagogue, Mr. Bowers, and killing a bunch of Jews. What was his reason in his own mind for doing that? He was upset that there were basically brown-skinned people coming across the border, the southern border of the U.S. He was seeing it as an invasion, which is the same language that President Trump was using at the time, and was there had been a meeting of HIAS, which is an American Jewish group that helps immigrants, that had been held at the Tree of Life synagogue. So he went and figured, I'm going to go stop these folks from helping immigrants, and he's shooting Jews. And everybody would see that as an act of anti-Semitism, although his response was triggered by the concern about immigrants. We don't think about another shooting that happened a few months later at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, where somebody went in and shot Mexican and Mexican Americans. And his ideology, if you looked at who he was and made him tick, was practically the same as the guy who went into the synagogue. But when we look at just what's happening about Jews as opposed to a larger framework, that's a problem. The other aspect of it in terms of thinking about anti-Semitism is that when I speak to synagogues in the U.S., for example, and the question would always come up, especially a couple of years ago when there were some campaign ads and other statements from Donald Trump. Is he really anti-Semitic? Is he not anti-Semitic? So I'm not interested in really parsing that. I recognize that he's sort of empowering people that see the world that way, talking about some of the fine people in Charlottesville with the tiki torches and the Nazi flags. But the more serious concern to me is what he was saying about Muslims and what he was saying about immigrants, because anti-Semitism at heart is conspiracy theory. It's conspiracy theory that says Jews are there to conspire to harm non-Jews, and providing an explanation for what goes wrong in the world. You think historically, the blood libel, Jews poisoning wells, Holocaust denial, Jews making up the Holocaust, all these things fit into that pattern. The conspiracy theories are primed when people see an us versus them. And when you have leaders stoking that, even if it's not about Jews, it's inevitable that anti-Semitism will be an outflow of it, because that's a tried and true conspiracy theory to explain the world, especially when people believe that there are others that are taking away their birthright, which is part of the push that Trump was making about anti-immigrants and anti-Muslims. So it's a larger lens to see it. There are other components of it too, but that's to me the essence of it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I would just say that for me, this was not something that I really saw in focus, I guess, until I heard your explanation of it, which is that this idea that there's certain conditions that make it more likely that conspiracy theories are going to rise and be believed, and that eventually they'll get to the Jews, even if that's not where they started.
Yeah, absolutely, because it gives an explanation for the world. I mean, there's a woman named Kathleen Blee, who's a sociologist, who wrote a piece about women in the Klan, which I thought was pretty instructive years ago. And she said the people came to their racism by, at least in their imagination, some particular event. Whether it was real or not, we don't know. But a black young woman was playing a radio too loud on a bus, and that's where she learned she didn't like black people. With Jews, it was like an aha moment of, this is how the world works.
Hmm.
And as you and I had been talking a couple of weeks ago, there's a friend of mine who was very involved in pushing back against the militia movement in the mid 90s. And he had a wonderful metaphor for describing sort of the system about how these ideas work. For those in Germany who may not remember, no, the militia movement was a far right, anti Semitic, white supremacist, largely group that saw the government as the evil empire. And Timothy McVeigh, who was responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing, was in the militia culture, gone to some militia meetings and sort of reading the materials. But my friend Ken Toole, who was dealing with one of the ground zeros of this in Montana, said that what was happening was that the militia movement was sort of like a funnel moving in space. And what he meant by that was that people were getting sucked in by mainstream issues. In that case, in that time, it was gun control issues, federal use of land, and other similar sort of mainstream issues. And once they got inside that funnel, they were exposed to conspiracy theories and more of a, seeing the world in us and them and reducing it to the simplest terms. And the further they got into it, the more likely they got exposed to the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And out of the small end of the funnel were the people that were the warriors, the zealots, the one who turned over their identity entirely to these conspiracy theories that were driving them. And what was useful about that model is it suggested the more people that were being shoved into the large end of the funnel, the more people that would pop out. So it saw it as a system. And I think that's how it works. Anti-Semitism is the granddaddy of conspiracy theories. And if you're priming people to see the world that way, that's a challenge. And one of the reasons why this seems to work is that if you look at the social psychology that forms part of hate studies, people, especially when their identity is tethered to an issue of that they see it as social justice or injustice, their thinking changes. We even know it in brain science that you can see in MRIs of people with hatred, their different parts of the brain fire. But basically what we try to do is to make the complex simple, to see in us versus them, and to decide who's good and who's bad. And in that dynamic, seeing Jews as bad as an explanation for the world is something that's likely to be increased.
Yeah, kind of that behind the scenes puppet master idea.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, let me just ask, in some of your writing, you discuss scholarly work on the other, right? The tendency of people to define themselves as an in-group and their hostility to other groups. Okay. Um, right, this is true in both Germany and the US. Some people talk about, actually in both places, people sometimes talk about unothering, meaning kind of change that dynamic. I mean, I think the next step to ask is there research about how to accomplish that?
Yeah, there is some, and there are suggestions about how to counter that. And part, it's not unexpected that when you see things that promote empathy, when you promote the idea of who's the us that's larger than narrower, that can reduce hatred. To give you a couple of examples, there's an old post-war study done by a social psychologist named Sharif, where he had like 12-year-old kids in Oklahoma who were sent to a summer camp in a place called Robbers Cave. And they were like peas in the pod. They were all from intact homes, middle class, white, Christian, and so forth. And they didn't know there were actually two camps. They didn't know that the other existed until they started seeing some signs of that. And they were fighting over things that are symbols. I mean, we fight over symbols today, Confederate statues. And so they were fighting over their flags and their turf. And they were measuring the fact that these folks had, prejudicial attitudes towards the kids in the other camp. Towards the end, they had to work together. There was a problem. I forget if it was like the water tank breaking, but something they all were required to be together to work to fix a particular problem. And that seemed to reduce prejudice. Maybe because it was a superordinate goal, maybe because it increased the empathy, maybe because it increased the the idea of who's the us. And I saw over the years when I was working at AJC, some things that seemed to me anecdotally to reflect that observation. For example, we had a number of different groups that were, Jewish and some, African American or Jewish and Hispanic or whatever to discuss issues in the different communities and to try to get to understand each other better. But the ones that seemed to have the staying power, the ones that seemed to work, were the ones that had another layer of identity, Black and Jewish accountants or Black and Jewish lawyers. So there is some suggestion that when people can see each other as part of an us, it helps. And that's encouraging. There's one thing that you're asking about what the Bard Center is hoping to do. There's one program that I hope to be able to build, which is to take kids from Bard has a network of early colleges across the country in New York and in Baltimore, Washington, Cleveland, New Orleans, elsewhere. Kids that can go through high school and graduate with an associate's degree. And I'm thinking about setting up a program to take them and mix and match kids from different backgrounds. For example, a Jewish kid from New York and an Hispanic kid from LA and a Black kid from Louisiana, and then send them for a few weeks to, say, Pine Ridge Indian Reservation to help with Habitat Humanity there for people in American Indians. And mix and match it that way and bring in some social psychologists to measure, and then over time, whether that experience helps to reduce prejudice. Because my sense is from reading the literature that if you bring people together, make them a team to do something collectively, that will help break down stereotypes. And certainly, public service is a good thing in any event.
And I think I think what you're saying is it's not a project where you bring people together to have dialogue about their differences. So you bring them together to do something completely different.
You bring them together so that they can see each other as human beings. The idea is, as you and I talked, the antidote to me or the opposite of hate is not love, it's empathy. So when you see somebody else as a human being, when you see somebody else as part of a team that you're working with together, that at least holds the potential. I mean, again, we want to see about studied long term. Does it really have an impact? And there's not as much data as I would like taking particular programs and seeing, do they have staying power? This might be an opportunity for something
Right.
like that.
And as I understand from you, that there is, while there's research and evidence on some of these areas,
Sure.
it seems like the big thing that you've said more than once is the need for long-term studies on these things.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that years ago, I mean, there's a project called Facing History in Ourselves, and years ago there was an analysis of it. And I'm a fan of it. I love the people there. I work with them. But it was, interesting that the data that they showed about looking at eighth graders, it was sort of mixed about did the program help or not, and it's very expensive and difficult to follow over time. But there have been studies about in the U.S. There was Nancy Reagan was famous for Just Say No to Drugs, and there was a big program to teach about that in school. There's also programs about rejecting tobacco,
Right.
which was, different things for different levels of education and so forth. But there were long-term studies on that, and they found that even though there were short-term differences, over the long haul, people that went through those programs are just as likely to do drugs and to smoke as people that
Yeah.
didn't.
I hear you. I should just point out that there's a good number of Facing History folks who are actually at this event.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So, and we're big fans.
Yep. Yeah, me too. Me too.
So let me just keep going. A couple more things, and then we'll bring in Veronica, I think. So you've taught this course on anti-Semitism that you describe in your most recent book. And I guess I was just wondering, can you give us just a small taste of how you approach this topic? And particularly, I'm hoping you'll mention quickly the anecdote either about the Dominican student
Right.
or the student with a Syrian background, a couple things that you mentioned there.
Sure, sure. I mean, one of the things that when people ask me about what to do about anti-Semitism, one of the things I always come back to is I wish there were more interdisciplinary courses in college campuses to look at anti-Semitism. I think it gets folded into things like Holocaust studies or honorable mention in the sociology class about prejudices, but standalone full semester interdisciplinary courses on anti-Semitism, I think would be a very useful thing. And actually, as a professor, it's a fun thing to teach too, to really get the students involved into thinking about it. And one of the things I do is, as you would know, come as no surprise given what I've described here, is I start off talking about hate and what we know about hate and how do we understand hate, and then get into the history of anti-Semitism. And one of the things I try to do is to get students to think of anti-Semitism in comparing it and contrasting to other types of prejudice. I gave them all assignments to do that at one point, to figure out some, I didn't really care what it was, discrimination, prejudice, hatred, that interested them, and where is it like and where is it unlike anti-Semitism. And there are the two that you mentioned. One was, this is the time I taught it around the time of the Arab Spring. There was a Jewish girl whose family had come from Syria originally. And she was fascinated with what was happening then with the attacks on the Copts in Egypt. And her paper was looking at that, comparing it to anti-Semitism, pondering if European anti-Semitism hadn't been imported into the Middle East in the 1800s and the 1900s, would the discrimination against the Jewish community in Egypt been similar to that of the Copts? So she saw the similarities, and she saw what was different to the importation of European anti-Semitic tropes that helped to animate some of what was happening in the experience that her family had, let alone the Israel issues. So that was useful. And then there's a Dominican girl. Actually, there's more to the story. One of the reasons why she took the class was her father was a blatant anti-Semite, and she, didn't know what that was about and wanted to find out more about anti-Semitism. So she looked at it, to the comparison of the discrimination against darker skinned Dominicans, because there is discrimination inside the community there between darker skin and lighter skin, to see, compare and contrast. And that's one of the things that, that I think is really important about looking at all these different types of hatred. We tend to think of Jews as monolithic, Dominicans as, so there are so many differences inside communities. The idea of us versus them isn't limited in many ways to what we see is totally outside and inside our groups too. And you were making mentions about issues about Israel. That's one of the fault lines of who's the us and them inside the Jewish community.
We need to move on in just a minute, but let me just add one more element here, which is the idea that there isn't just one monolithic group for any minority, let's say. One of the things that we deal with now, I'm thinking about Germany, is that in Germany there aren't that many Jews. Something like 1 in 700 or 1 in 800 people is Jewish. And most people in most parts of the country haven't really met a Jew, or have met very few anyway in their life. And I know that one of our speakers later, Wencke Stegemann, does work where she tries to make sure that people who haven't met somebody who's Jewish to actually understand what a German Jew is like. And I would say the people that are part of our network that are Obermeyer Award winners and things like that often are doing something related, which is trying to show the history and culture of Jews who are part of a community and not just as the victims of the Holocaust, let's say. And I guess I was wondering, do you think those two things, I understand that they're different, but in one way they're both about the same idea that you're not trying to look at a group of people as monolithic.
Yeah, you have to remember that anti-Semitism is also largely a thing about Jews as an idea, right? So you have anti-Semitism in Japan. From every decade or two, the protocols become a big seller there. So
the
protocols of the Elders of Zion, the classic czarist anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that was really was the fire for many of the pogroms. Henry Ford sold it in the United States. It was, the Jews, as you were saying, behind the scenes control everything. And that becomes a big seller in Japan, where there are no Jews to meet, and there were really very few Jews ever. So with that as remember that anti-Semitism also works that way. I always think it's important for people to be humanized. If you think about it, what do we read? We read stories about people. Those are things that that's why we have literature. That's
right.
That's why we have plays. That's why we have movies. It's all about people. We connect with ideas of human beings, and to the extent that we can make history seem not as a caricature or about dead people long ago, but to really bring them, even if they're no longer there in the same numbers, bring them to life in some way, to imagination. I think that at least holds to me the promise of creating some empathy. Again, I would love to see more details over time. To not only does that type of approach work, but if it works, then to break it down into subcomponents, to what works best, what doesn't, and how do you tailor it. But I commend the idea of doing this type of work very much.
Great. Well, listen, Ken, thank you so much. We'll come back to you a little bit later when it's time for Q&A, but I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You bet. Next, we have Veronica Nam. I hope.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Joining us from Berlin. In a nice, I don't know how new it is, but using some video conferencing equipment that gives you more background. So nice. So let's start here, Veronica, if we could. Could you give just a very brief summary of what the Anne Frank Center does? Just like the minute-long version, let's say.
Okay. The Anne Frank Centrum is the German partner organization of the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam. The center reminds of Anne Frank and her diary with exhibitions and an array of educational programs. It facilitates learning opportunities in which children and young people can examine history and link it to the world in which they live today. They learn how to take on social responsibility and how to engage with freedom, equal rights, and democracy. The Anne Frank Centrum works explicitly against anti-Semitism, but includes other forms of discrimination as context.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you. Could you do me a favor and just step back a little bit and just talk briefly about the situation with anti-Semitism in Germany during the pandemic? My impression is that there's been some developments there that particularly relate to, the way people protest and some of the groups that are targeted.
Yeah. If we look at the findings from the German Association of Research and Information Centers on Antisemitism, shortly RIAS, we can see that during the pandemic, anti-Semitic incidents from the conspiracy myth spectrum nearly doubled. And yeah, for example, there are protests against government measures to contain the pandemic, often included anti-Semitic conspiracy myths, but also there were anti-Semitic conspiracy myths concerning the rise of COVID-19.
You mean the origins?
That's it. And
Yeah.
then also the spreading and everything.
Right. So it sounds very similar to what Ken was talking about, right? The idea that the Jews are eventually going to, when conspiracies are common, eventually the Jews will be targeted.
Yeah. There is a crisis and you got a scapegoat for a bad thing.
Yeah. No, I hear you. So let me now talk a little bit about the Anne Frank Centrum, if we could. And I'm wondering if you have been very much involved in the design of the education programs there and so on. And I'm wondering if you can just talk, I'm going to do two things. One is I'd love you to talk just very broadly about how the Anne Frank Centrum thinks about its programs and the idea of what we're calling unothering, changing somebody from somebody who seems like a them to somebody who's more like us, let's say. And can you just talk a little bit about how you approach that issue?
Mm-hmm. You already said that there are not so many Jews living in Germany, and so we can say that there is a non-Jewish German culture of remembrance of the Holocaust, Erinnerungskultur. And in this culture of remembrance, Jews are often made into others. Jews are spoken about as if there were no Jews living in Germany today, and as if they were not actively participating in the culture of remembrance. At the same time, the culture of remembrance is seen as an important instrument for counteracting anti-Semitism. For the Anne Frank Centrum, that means that an important point is to remember Anne Frank as a human being, as a person, as Ken said before, and as a whole person. So of course, she was persecuted as a Jew, but we don't present her exclusively as a victim. Yeah, we give her a voice, we give her diary a voice, and we show her in her different layers of identity.
Yeah, and it sounds like that those different layers are one of the ways that you think about kind of breaking through this issue of us versus them, and to to think about these issues of anti-Semitism overall. Is that right?
Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely.
Could you let me move forward a little bit? Could you tell me about how the exhibition that you designed helps young people learn about present-day anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry? I'm thinking particularly of Jews' experience of anti-Semitism, some of the things you've said, and the place in the exhibition where young people can report their own experiences. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we redesigned our exhibition. The title is All About Anne. And an important thing is that the exhibition does not only show the history, but it makes the connection between history and today. And in this part where we try to connect history to today, we have a special part where we show anti-Semitic incidents, and we show many of these incidents, and we do this because we want to tell the youngsters and the people who visit our exhibition that Jews are confronted with anti-Semitism in all areas of their everyday life. For example, in social media, in public transportation, in the park, on the street, at school, in restaurants, etc. And we give examples for all these situations. And also we show that there are different ways how the violence manifests itself. For example, hurtful behavior, insults, damage of property, physical attacks, and even murder. For us, it's important because we have the experience that the youngsters and our visitors see anti-Semitism as an historical problem and not a problem for our society today. And then we want the visitors to engage, so they have the opportunity to write down and exhibit their own experiences with anti-Semitism. And there, so we give them, sort of formulas.
I understand it's almost like filing a police report, right? It's sort of like
in a way, it's a little, it's nicer layouted, but
fair enough. Fair enough. Sure.
And there, a distinction is made between people who are affected by anti-Semitism or people who are who witness the anti-Semitic incident. And this makes clear that anti-Semitism affects everyone in society, and it is not something that can be ignored. So you cannot not act.
Got it. And so in a way, this is a way to make it more meaningful to the people who come into your center. Yeah.
And we also ask them about their action after the anti-Semitic insult. Did they talk to someone about it? Or did they, for example, report it to RIAS, to this
Got it.
This structure where you can...
so did they actually report it officially? Yeah. Makes sense. Can I ask you, I'm just thinking about some of the programs you've described.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a specific time or incident that stands out to you when a young person's mind was changed, or one of your participants clearly changed their views? And I'm thinking particularly of that I think a young boy.
Yes.
Tell us what happened.
Yeah, that's true. You told us a story from a young girl at the beginning, and it made me very concerned. And I have to tell you a story from a non-Jewish boy who was 9 years old when I met him. It was at the beginning of a guided tour through the exhibition with an elementary school with the whole class. And this boy came to me at the beginning and told me that he said, I think it's a pity that there are still Jews today. And I had to swallow.
Wow.
And it was good that it was a young boy, because otherwise I wouldn't ask him. But I asked him, why is that? What do you mean? And he explained to me, I think it's like this. There used to be Jews in the past, and then there was Hitler, and he started a big war. And if there are still Jews today, then there can be war again today. And I'm very afraid of this war. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, I was very glad that the boy had confided in me, that he told me his thoughts, and that I was able to talk to him and explain him the history very briefly, that it was the National Socialists that brought in the violence and not the Jews. And for me, this example shows that younger children should not be left alone with their questions on history. Because in German Jewish schools, normally, history classes are when you are 14 or 15 years old, and children are not,
So this is not normally something you would bring up with children that age?
That's it.
Yeah.
Teachers think that it's too complicated and also that it's too harmful for them, but it's there anyway.
Yeah.
The whole course is there anyway, and so you have to work with them.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense that you have to make sure to think of it as closing the loop, making sure that they understand why, or you know, that you engage with them on it. Which is sort of related to the story I told as well. We're gonna have to move on in a minute, but I did want to ask you one more thing, which is I understand that one of the things you do at the center is organize walking tours of Jewish neighborhoods in Berlin, and it sounds so similar to what many Obermeyer Award winners do. I was wondering, maybe you could just talk a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish with those. Just a you know, a quick summary.
Yeah, the walking tours at the surrounding of the Anne Frank Centrum that we do with the youngsters, we show them different things, but we also show them monuments. And we ask them, first of all, of course, what can be seen here, which historical event or which person is commemorated here, is there an author and an addressee recognizable of this memorial? And what we want to tell them is that history is not simply there, but it takes people who choose to remember. Ideally, it's decided in a democratic process in society to commemorate a historical event. And you can also see that the commemoration changes over time. But the most important thing is that you can get them engaged. So if you don't commemorate, who is doing this?
Right. In other words, to give them a sense of what its meaning is, or something they can relate to. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Look, many other things I'd love to ask you about, but we're gonna move on to Wencke. But we'll bring questions back and join us a little bit later. Thank you, Veronica. Great. And next we have Wencke Stegemann. And welcome, Wencke. So nice to have you here.
Hi, nice to be here.
So I was wondering, since your organization is probably less well known than the other two here, could you just give us a very brief summary of what Stories for Tomorrow does?
But first, I have to say two things before I start to I'm really moved by this story you told us about the little girl. Really moved. It's this kind of story I heard from my friends here, from my Jewish friends, nearly every day. So this is really moving to me.
I'm sorry to hear that. And I tell it okay today, but usually I have trouble getting through it because it's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a really tough
ahead.
one. And the second, I have to say, because Veronica is here, I really appreciate Anne Frank Centrum. For me, it's the best exhibition for kids, for young kids especially, and it's the best exhibition to combine history and present time. So I really appreciate it. Thanks. So now to start with Stories for Tomorrow. You told me I have to shorten it up, so I tried.
It's okay. So just a quick summary of what Stories for Tomorrow does.
Stories for Tomorrow does a wide range of seminars and workshops, study trips, excursions, meetings, events, you name it. And our target group, if you call it so this way, are adults and kids at the same time. It depends on which group is asking for us. And there are groups we we call them potatoes. They're the Germans who live in Germany for many generations, just the normal Germans. and also students from with immigrant roots from Arabic countries or Turkish or Muslim roots. So this is all mixed. And our main focus is that to create a safe space or safe rooms for dialogue. So it means basically that all participants have to or should feel comfortable and safe to speak what they want to tell us, and to listen to the others, and simply to exchange perspectives, to exchange stories, and to learn with and from each other. So this is mainly the basic thing in Stories for Tomorrow: create this safe space.
And are you trying to use the safe space to create empathy?
Yeah, for sure. That's our main vehicle, you say. Empathy can use it many times. Empathy, it's for me and my team the most important thing to work against prejudice, to work against hate. As Ken told, the opposite of hate is empathy, and I'm totally agree to this. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So let me just keep going for a second. So you've told me that anti-Semitism itself is embedded in German society and culture. That's still there. It's not just a problem that comes up from people on the fringes of society. Can you just briefly explain what you mean by that?
The best example is the rise. Veronica speaks about the rise in the COVID times. It's a good example for that, because my opinion, and but I'm not alone, I think, is that anti-Semitism is deep rooted in German society, or mainly in Western Europe Christian society, not only in Germany, because there's a long tradition of anti-Jewish thoughts, anti-Jewish feelings, long tradition of Jews seen as the other. They are, during all the years, more or less, I think more, it's only been tolerate, not integrate. They are only tolerate, not integrate. And you see it. One example is the language. There are parts of German language which is kind of anti-Semitic.
So the language itself.
The language itself. There are some words, and often in seminars I'm working with the language, and I want to show the people that some parts of our language, of our German language, is anti-Semitic, and they and most of us didn't know this or don't know that.
Wencke, can you give us an example or two of what you mean?
One example, is for most, the one example is Mischpoke. I think most German know what it is.
So this is the Yiddish word Mishpocha, yeah?
Yeah. It comes from
family.
And in Yiddish, it's just family, with no negative or positive connotation. It's just family. And in many times in Germany, Mischpoke is used for this crazy folks. I'm not want to get along with them. It's my family, but I don't want to see them. So this is Mischpoke. And
so it's family in a sort of a negative way.
Yeah, definitely. This is one example, and maybe I just think about a new example. We spoke about jüdische Hass.
Right. Jewish hate or Jewish speed.
Yeah, Jewish hate, Jewish speed. And another one is I just remembered because
hold on, Wencke, before you keep going, tell me, Jewish hate or Jewish speed. What does that mean? How do people use that term?
They use it when people are really hurry up things and don't go they don't go in details, and they just what is it?
So you mean sort of fast and not too careful?
Yeah, that's it. And then they use Jewish hate. And another one, I was remembering a party when I was a student by myself. a friend of mine came back from the beer gets out on the party, and they have to go to buy some new beer, and they come back and they say, oh, it was so expensive, the beer was so expensive. And another one at the party say, oh, did you buy this from Jews, because it was so expensive. And it was a party from a friend of mine, so I'm really, and I was so, oh, what did you say? So that's, and yeah, as you can imagine, my friends are not from the fringe of society, they're just in the middle of society. Right. Yeah, and that's it. Yeah.
Let me hold on for 1 second. I do want to mention to everybody who's joining us, please, if you have questions, you can go ahead and ask them in the chat. We will get to them later on the event. So please go ahead. If you have questions, put them in there. There's somebody watching and we'll make sure we get to them. All right, Veronica, let me just ask you, can you tell us what your general approach is to this difficult challenge about prompting people to talk openly about prejudice against the other or against Jews? You know, what do you do?
As I say, this creation of a safe space is really important, that people can talk about their views about Jews without having the fear I will judge them, so that they can speak freely, openly about what they know about Jews, what their perspective is on Jews, especially when it comes students with Arabic roots or Muslim roots. There is some kind of, but I don't want to focus on that group. This is another one, because so they just need to speak freely about it, and maybe there are prejudice, and then when we have the task to speak about that prejudice and why it is a prejudice or why it is a stereotype, and then
so you basically have to surface these beliefs in order to deal with them.
Yeah,
right? They have to appear, so you have to find a way to make that.
Yeah.
And then you said to me, you want to try and help them see the world through the eyes of people who experienced what the Nazis did or some other part of this kind of big. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, as you said before, I arrange meetings with also with Jews who live today in Germany, so that they can meet with with present Jews living in Germany, but there are a few, but there are Jews.
Sure. Okay.
And the other thing is to combine this with history, and then I work with biography, just the simple biography working, tell them stories about people, and then for me it's important that I tell them stories from people they can relate to. For example, if I have a group from Hamburg, students from Hamburg, we speak about Jews from Hamburg, so they can relate to some places to Hamburg and so on. And this it's mostly easier then to build a connection with the stories of the Jews and the present time. So
and then your ultimate goal, is it just to change people's beliefs, or is it to make a kind of a different kind of relationship between them and, let's say, the minority group? You were talking about allies, for example.
Allies, yeah, it's that's the basic goal, to create alliances between the people, and between minorities and between the majority itself, with the minority. So that's a basic thing and the main goal, but it doesn't work every time. So
sure, that makes sense. I'm going to just jump forward for a second. So Ken Stern talked about one way to change prejudice and stereotypes is to bring people from different groups together and give them a task that they must do together to succeed. I understand that you have this kind of thing planned next year in the form of a hackathon. Could you briefly explain that?
Yes, not me alone. It's a big group of people. So I
didn't mean to assume that it was just one person, but tell us about it.
Yeah, it's a hackathon against anti-Semitism, and yeah, we want to motivate most young people and young people from every kind of group. Should be non-Jewish people, Christian people, Muslim people, Buddhism people. I don't know. It's not what you have in Germany. So and we want to motivate them to come to our hackathon and work on ideas they have, and ideas they have because maybe it's their hobby or something, or it's their study they do. We will have 3 categories. It's the first one is to work on laws. How can we change laws or create new laws to fight against anti-Semitism? And the second will be educational programs, digital educational programs. And the third one is working on software which can kind of filter in social media for anti-Semitic or racist words. So this is the main goal, is to find new ways to fight against anti-Semitism. Yeah.
Great. Oh, thank you for that. We probably have to wrap up in a minute, but let me ask one more question, which is that, as you said, in addition to dealing with Germans whose family have been in Germany for generations, your program also includes Muslims and other whose families arrived more recently, kind of a range of people. Can you briefly tell about lessons you've learned from working with people with this kind of immigrant background?
First lesson I have that most of them feel kind of uncomfortable when Germans speak with them about anti-Semitism, because they feel that Germans assume that they are automatically anti-Semitic because they are Muslims, for example. So that's one lesson I get. And the other lesson is it's really, sometimes it's so easy to connect people, and it's kind of easy about, for example, food. I told you the story before. It's I was with a youth group. We're planning a trip to Israel, and we have, before in Germany, we have a meeting with Jews from Hamburg, and at this time, and they just meet Jews for the first time. And I want to be sure that they will meet Jews before they go to Israel. So that's the point I have. And they meet and they talk, and it was sometimes a kind of not so easy, but because it's the first time and they're really a bit so. But then it comes to food. They talk about food they like, and one Jewish guy told that he loves hummus. His mom makes every Shabbat maybe or something. And then we have these other guys from the Arabic background, and they love hummus too. So that's the connection they have, and you love hummus too. Let's make a dinner together so we can exchange the recipes. So yeah.
Oops. Okay, good. That's muted. Great. So we're gonna wrap up. Just one quick thing. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you this one. So doing impressive work. But obviously one organization can't deal with these challenges alone, and you're active in Widen the Circle's network that we're building, which brings together Germans who are actively dealing with these issues. Can you just keep it very short, because I don't want it to be self-serving, but can you briefly tell me about the importance of this network and why it's important to you? Just a couple sentences.
I can speak it short, because Widen the Circle is a safe space for me. That's I create safe spaces for my participants, and Widen the Circle is a safe space for me. I had a moment last year during the pandemic. I was in the event, maybe it's just 1 year ago. I don't know exactly. It was with Shilaya, Washington. And it was a point in my life where I was really frustrating because of the rise of anti-Semitism and the pandemic. I can't work that time and so. But then I was in a safe room with all these people, like tonight or today. It's in US. It's tonight in Germany.
Sure.
And I feel safe and I feel comfortable because all the other people have the same yeah, the same wishes about society, what it should be in the future. And yeah, I can learn from them. I get motivation, inspiration. So yeah. So
Wonderful. So look, thank you so much. I appreciate the explanation. We don't have to belabor it, but it's helpful for us to hear. All right. Thank you, Veronica. We're now going to switch to questions and answers. I know we've talked a little longer than we expected, but I do want to give a chance for people to have ask questions to our three panelists. So we'll bring them up now, along with Dan Fleshler, to pick out some questions for us to answer.
Well, there were several comments, and I'm going to turn them into questions. Bernie Thomas Kale mentioned that there is research indicating that one important result is that teachers aren't aware about the anti-Semitism they themselves spread while teaching. So Veronica and Wencke, what is the difference between what you do and what's happening in the German school system, where it's mandated to teach the Holocaust?
Okay. Who wants to start? Veronica, why don't I go to you first?
Yeah, it's not that easy to say it in one sentence, but yeah, one difference is the perspective. Once again, so we give space for a Jewish young girl, for Anne Frank, and we show her, we take her diary, her text, her thoughts, and we work on this. And if you open the school book in Germany, there you can find, for example, anti-Semitic laws. And this is these are the words of National Socialists. And you can see anti-Semitic pictures and other forms of propaganda, and there you have the eyes of an perpetrator.
So you're saying that sort of these are artifacts from the Nazis that you can look at, as
Yeah.
like the personhood of someone who was alive then. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the thing is that if you see the artifacts of the Nazis, there you can see and you do learn their mindset. And this is not often critically done, because we know when students look at an anti-Semitic picture, for example, then they forget about all the critical questions and things about it. They only remind this, oh, Jews look like, I saw this picture.
So you're saying some of the stereotypes are perpetuated that way.
That's it, absolutely. That's a problem.
Let me just ask, Veronica, you're nodding. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm nodding all the time because, yeah, I don't want to be rude, but the education of teachers, mainly history teachers in Germany, is not so good in this part. I would say, maybe Veronica, you'd say, yeah,
and it's not so creative or inspiring, I wouldn't think.
That's it, and yeah, but the most important thing is that the education is not so good because they even don't know about modern forms of anti-Semitism. They don't know about, they only teach the children about Shoah and maybe about Israel and Palestine. This is the two things students learn in German schools. So there are just a few teachers who do this another way, but only a few. So that's a real problem in Germany, I would say.
Thank you. Dan, next.
In Germany, every political region has its own anti-Semitism commissioner, except Bremen. So I know, Ken, you've talked about the role of political leadership in this, and that there's some evidence that if political leaders speak out, it might make a difference. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I can't comment on the specifics in Germany because I don't know about the different, ways that this is politically set up. But thinking largely, I think it's really important for leaders, political leaders, business leaders, others, to set a tone that says we're all in this together. We're part of the social fabric, and that picking out on any one of us is basically targeting all of us. I mean, if you look at some of the things that I teach about combating hatred, I pull from things like Martin Luther King's letter to the Birmingham jail, or other things that basically say this is about us together as a society and what we're going to do, rather than to pick it apart group by group. So I think that's an important thing. One of the other important things, again, taking the lens and putting it out wider, is not just what people are saying, but the strength of our democratic institutions. I think that one of the things that's really critical to fighting any form of hatred, anti-Semitism included, is to have strong, robust democratic institutions. When they're under threat, when the judiciary is threatened, when the free press is threatened, it becomes much easier for authoritarianism, totalitarian voices, excuse me, to promote this sort of idea of we're under attack, it's them. So the more robust our institutions are to promote democracy and the capacity for people to view their, voice their views without being stigmatized, I think the better off we'll be. But it's important for leaders to basically not sweep any type of hatred under the rug, but to take it as an opportunity to build something better for all of us.
Great.
Another question is, what is the role of social media in increasing anti-Semitism and hate in general in the US and Germany? And what could be done about it? Now, if none of you wants to volunteer, Joel, you need to ask someone.
No,
Ken, go for it.
Sure, I can look. Hatred, including anti-Semitism, is about ideas, and we've had different ways of propelling those ideas over the years. Some people were worried about radio when it first came out, and television, let alone books and paperback. So each medium is a way of propelling ideas, but the ideas are the core of what create the problem. Social media has exacerbated it because it becomes easier to feed into your own universe and to seeing things in a very narrow way, with other people supporting you, for rumors to go out of control, for conspiracy theories to be seen as normative. It does all those things, and it's a complicated thing. But I don't think that the answer to it, although there probably needs to be some form of regulation and some stronger ways, I see it as it's also an opportunity to use social media much more effectively against hate. I'll give you two short examples for what I mean, which I think that's one of the things our center is doing, is trying to figure out other ways of doing this. One is that there was a neo-Nazi march that was planned in Western Montana, where somebody had been threatening the Jewish community. And one of the things that we did was, rather than try to shut them down, was to turn this around using social media to get people to make a pledge for money tied to how long these neo-Nazis, if they showed up, would march. So it gave a disincentive. They ultimately ended up not marching. But what it did is the money would go for things that they would detest. So they were raising money for Holocaust education, for police training on hate crimes, all those things if they marched. And it gave people outside the community something to do, rather than just hit a like. And it gave the people there in the community a sense that others cared about them. So there are other ways of building this too. I mean, one of the things that we're working on for the center is the hope of building some sort of a clearinghouse to get people connected to things to fight hatred much more easily and seamlessly. You have to just sort of happenstance to see around the internet universe. And one of the reasons why I was eager to do that is, I'll tell you a short story. Back at the time of the election, right before the election in 2020, there was a woman living in northern Idaho, which was sort of ground zero for the neo-Nazis years ago and is still a challenge. And she had a Biden lawn sign, and it got picked up and replaced with a Confederate flag. And that happened repeatedly, and the police didn't come until the sixth time, when they not only put the Confederate flag, but they took a bunch of gallons of paint and put it all over her porch. The police finally showed up. So I talked to this woman. I knew the human rights folks. I knew how to report to other police agencies. I knew what support you might get online and offline. I knew questions to ask her about resources that she might not even have considered. But if she weren't talking to me, or somebody like me, from the ADL or the Southern Poverty Law Center, she would be at a loss. So if we could figure out ways to make these types of resources better, I'm much more focused on how do we use the internet better than how do we put a delete key for things we don't like.
I just want to point out, so first of all, Veronica, thank you for posting a few things in the chat related to your work with social media and your work with the Amadeo Antonio Foundation. That's great. I'm going to jump in here, Dan. I think there's a question there from Stephen Cole, I see, about the idea that contemporary Jews be active in conversations and activities that place Jews among others. So they're more part of us rather than them. And his concern is that this sounds a lot like the idea of being fully integrated, like Jews were before the Holocaust. Hopefully I've summarized that okay, Steve. But I'm wondering who wants to talk about that a little bit. I know it's rather provocative, but at the same time, it's a reasonable question for someone to ask. Ken, you're looking up. Veronica, I was hoping also you'd jump in a minute. Is that okay? No? Okay, let me send it to Ken then. Go for.
Well, look, there's no, magic bullet in all of this. I think that and I'm looking at the question as we speak. That's why I was looking. I mean that. Well, why don't you rephrase it again? Because I'm not sure I fully understand it.
Sure. So here, I'm just gonna look at your question. So prior to the rise of the Nazis, many Jews were fully integrated or felt they were fully integrated into German society, right? Part of the discussion here is about how to become more like us, where we're kind of not thought about as different or as the other. And how is this different from then?
Right. Well, okay, thanks. So, I mean, look, it's very easy for people to be seen as part of the fabric of society and then all of a sudden turn around to not be. We see it in contemporary politics in the US, for example. There are, people that felt neighborly and so forth. Now we're dividing lines over politics and what people think about Trump or what happened in the election. It's very easy to see disconnects between who's us and who's them. And that's part of the challenge. So there's nothing that I think totally cements the idea of identity. Identity is very multi-layered. And things can, push it and pull it in one way or another. So when we see, I think a few years ago, if you asked people in the Asian community in the US, they would have felt that they were very integrated, that they had high success rates in terms of schools and, and then you see that we have the pandemic and you have a leader talking about the China virus and the Kung, flu. And then you start seeing, a lot of anti-Asian violence. And I'm sure if you ask Asian folks, they don't feel as integrated as they did 3 or 4 years ago. And it takes very little, I think, to tip those sorts of balances. That being said, I think that the answer is really for people to see the larger community, see the differences as something that's of value, but it's still part of the same fabric. But the examples are replete in history of how it becomes too easy to change that dynamic, to take somebody who's your brother today and see him as an enemy tomorrow. I mean, look at Rwanda. There were people that were neighbors, or look at Sarajevo, look at many examples of people that were seen as neighbors, friends, intermarried, part of the same soccer team or whatever. And then a political event comes along or something else gets people to see symbols of they're really a them. And to turn against them. So throughout history, it's something that's very easy to flip around negatively.
Hold on, Wencke, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just want to add something. I agree totally with Ken in this way, and I want to add this why it is so important to build alliances. It's so important to build it, to make the people aware that it's not about anti-Semitism, it's not about racism. It's all about in what kind of society does I want to live in. I want to live in a society in which everybody can feel safe. This must be the answer, and that is the point we have to motivate and to open up the minds for the people. It's not about the anti-Semitism or the racism in particular. It's all about this simple thing. That is what I want to add. So it's not to get to know each other and build alliances is the first steps, but on the basic level, there's what kind of life, what kind of society do I want to live in? So that's the basic question. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, if just to add to that, I mean, I fully agree. I mean, for somebody like me, the idea of the demographic changes that are happening in the United States, it's neither here nor there. We're all American. Americanism is an idea. We're all equally part of the social fabric. That's fine. It doesn't scare me that we're having a demographic change based on background and skin color. But for the people for whom this is a frightening concept, that's really where anti-Semitism also has a key part of it, because especially for people that see whiteness as whites as supremacists, whites is better than non-whites, and that's part of the birthright of America and what it means to be America. When you look at the demographic projections and see that by 2050, if you believe the projections, we're going to become a majority non-white society, there's a dissonance here. They think, oh my God, we're losing a battle to people that we see as inferior. How could that be? And for a lot of these folks, the answer is, well, there's somebody behind the scenes putting their thumb on the scale, and that's the Jews. That's why you had the Charlottesville rally, the chant, Jews will not replace us, because they see Jews as attacking the ability of white people to have their birthright in this country. So it's a question of ideas of who we are as a society, and who it includes and who it excludes.
Well, let me close with it's a statement from one of the Obermeyer Award winners, Gabrielle Hanna, which is sort of sums up what we've been talking about, and maybe some of you might want to add to her question. She says, while hate may be the cause, it is indifference that opens the way for it to spread. Indifference, people sitting around not caring about any of this. How do we deal with this? What's our answer?
Well, I think there are lots of ways that people need to step forward and to be part of basic citizens, right? And there are different ways. I mean, I was talking about supporting democracy. So if you don't really speak out about hatred, but you're doing things to strengthen democracy and civil rights, I think you're making a contribution. We also, one of the things in society is that we have a right to not be involved. There's no, we would like people to be involved, but there's no sort of requirement to do so. So I think it's important for those of us who care about these things to do all we can to figure out how to maximize the potential for combating hatred. So, and to look at it, again, I've had people ask me, what's the one thing? And there is no one thing. I think having smarter ideas in the academy is important, and focusing attention on that. I think the work of civil society groups represented by some of the groups here today, and some of the people in the audience I know are parts of groups too. That's important. I think we all have to do what we can, and to people to participate in voting. That's an important thing. It's all part of the puzzle of what we do.
Ken, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Because I think I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask this question, which is that one thing that can deal with indifference, I think, is inspiration, right? Stories. I think that's what Wencke and Veronica are involved in. I just was wondering if one of you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, another thing I want to also to give into the space is that we work with this peer guide education concept. So it is not that we tell the youngsters, you know, I know exactly the history and I know all the stories and you have to listen to me, but that we empower them to tell the story of Anne Frank and to find their point and their standing. And yeah, I think this is different. It's very important because the standpoint in the present makes a difference. And if it's a diverse standpoint, and if there are different people who talk about history, then you got a good concert of voices, so to say.
Yeah, nice, nice.
Yes.
Veronica, maybe you could say a little bit about inspiration
Yeah, inspiration.
and getting past indifference.
Yeah, past the difference. What I want to say is that in our seminars we do always start with the participants' view and to say to promote them that their stories and their perspective is the same, is worth than all the other views and all the other perspectives, that they are important as when they are 9 years old, their story is so important, like a story from an older age. So this is what inspires young people to open up, to speak about what is their opinion, what are their views on society, on their daily life, and to push them up to self-confidence. So this is what we want to need. It's so and then we have in my future we have so many young people to do promoting democracy. So that's what we have to do. And we don't need any teachers to go on with this moral kind of teaching history. This is not the right way, I think. So yeah. Yeah, maybe Veronica agree because I know your exhibition. Yeah.
It sounds almost like you're saying that you want young people to realize their point of view matters.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
And if I could emphasize that, I mean, to me, when I talk about, I've asked lots of times to speak on Martin Luther King's birthday to students, and I tell them the story that I was actually in school, high school, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and the next day, the teacher said, how many of you would be marching with Martin Luther King if he were still alive? And I raised my hand, a couple of others did, and he basically, jumped down our throats, said, "Well, he was alive yesterday. Why weren't you marching with him then?" And I had never felt more like a hypocrite than at that moment. And I realized, as a teenager, I can do things. I can speak out. It's an opportunity for me to be engaged. And I think that lesson is critically important for students to take responsibility for their own world and however they choose to do it.
Great. I think that's probably good. And Dan, I think we've gotten through most of the questions. Yes. Yeah. So I think that's a great note to end on. So I just want to thank everyone for taking part in this event. I want to thank Wencke and Veronica and Ken for your perspective. Obviously this is a complicated issue, but it was really good to hear some reviews and insights at a time like this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Okay, take care. Have a good day.